wherever I go, I feel the love of people. And I feel my love going out toward them and God's love flowing through me out to them. And I will never forget standing on the Mount of Olives, going up on the Mount of Olives in my Jesus, when we were in Judea, in Palestine, and spending the night with Jesus. And the next morning, going out to the airport and finding 1,000 Arabs, undernourished, unfortunate ones, working away. And I looked out with compassion. I just felt the compassion of Jesus flowing out from me. I know how he looked with compassion upon the multitude. And as I just looked out there, the most distinguished one of all these Arabs, I think he was a sheik, laid down his sledgehammer, rose to a erect position, and came walking in a stately step straight toward me. It was a windy, cold day. I was waiting for the airplane to call us. He took me by the gloved hand. He leaned forward and touched his forehead to my hand. And then his lips. Then his forehead. Then his lips. Then, without saying a word, he just turned and went back in the same stately way. And it occurred to me, if all of us Christians looked out with compassion upon the suffering world, even upon the communists, and let Jesus look through our eyes, we'd find that all the world would come to us. I really think we saw Jesus in me that day. I resolved then I was going to try to be worthy to do something to bring about peace in this troubled world. I can't tell you all the big things I'm planning or dreaming, but I find it all ends up with just the thing to do is to erase self out so utterly, to cross out the little I with a dot over it on the outstretched arms of love until they won't see anything but Jesus. And I am setting aside this year to live with the Heavenly Father so close that when next year starts, 1957 is going to be the great year. God told me it was. If no one else is going to take hold of the situation, they can use me or use anyone else who's prepared. And without any apology at all, we're going to right straight up to the cannon's mouth and say there's only one way to solve these things, and that's the God way. I've had to apologize. All I have to admit when I talk to those 24 ministers in that big city on prayer, my theme was the prayer cell as the protoplasm of the spiritual life. When I finished, half of them said they really didn't believe in prayer, really, as a power. So I had felt like perhaps I should apologize and say, well, I don't want to hear extreme and all. When I asked Franklin Roosevelt to appoint a spiritual trust, a group of 4 or 5 men to pray for him like he appointed a brain trust, he spurned it. I felt perhaps I should have written another letter saying I want to apologize for butting in on such a queer thing. But I'm not apologizing anymore. We've tried everything else and everything failed. Somebody's got to walk right up and just say there's one way and one way only. And the old prophets, they spoke right out, and I don't intend to soft-pedal it very much longer. But I want to prepare myself now so I can speak like the prophets beginning next January. And when I go over to Great Britain in November to lead a special gathering of the ministers of England, I hope I can just set those ministers on fire. So I want your prayers. I want your prayers for the Lord to work to talk to me and said some wonderful things through me, because I want to be used that way. 30 years ago, I began in spiritual life by beginning with the simplest thing of all, the Lord's Prayer. I'm going to take a year and learn how to pray the Lord's Prayer. And I found it takes less than 30 seconds. Less than 30 seconds to repeat the Lord's Prayer. Well, 30 years have gone by. It's taken me 30 years to really get training in that Lord's Prayer that takes less than 30 seconds to say. For I found there's one sentence in it that would take me a year to learn how to pray, and it was simply this: Thy kingdom come, on earth as it is in heaven. You realize the Lord's Prayer is unusual, different from all other prayers. It's something like the Shepherd's Psalm. It's filled with commands, not requests. Almost like just saying, but they're the kind of commands we have a right to. It's like a little boy has a right to tell his father some things. He can say, Dad, it's time for breakfast ready, and comes to breakfast. Well, that's all right. But here it is: Hallowed be thy name. And thy kingdom come, and thy will be done on earth as in heaven. Not, please let your will be done. So I'm just I'm just affirming it, that thy will may be done, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Well, that's a command, but he didn't say give us bread for the whole year. If they would take bread here and for the whole year and store it away, it would get moldy before the year was over. God didn't ask us to ask for moldy bread. He said, just bread for the day. You have a perfect right to ask that. And forgive us our sins as we forgive our sinners. We have a right to ask that, or even command it. But not, if you don't forgive those who trespass against you, you don't have a right to ask you to forgive yours. But if you've forgiven others, you have a perfect right to ask it. And so I just started out each day, give us this day, thy kingdom come on earth as in heaven. And so I started out, decided to start living in heaven before I die. I'm so glad I did, because it's got so many, it's made life more interesting than I ever could have dreamed it would be. I think I must have had a fever. They say after you've had a fever, your mouth is dry. That's the sign you had a fever yesterday. So if you'll bring me a glass of water, I'll take care of that. Now I'm not afraid of death. People come to me and say, I'm just miserable because my husband died last year. Or my mother has died, and we all leaned on my mother, and I'm just disconsolate. Well, how old is your mother? Well, 65. That's too bad. She's going to live 10 years longer. But you know she's going to go sometime. I think I told you the other day how I found, when I went to McAllister College, I found the one thing that it lacked was nobody had died. That's the water in the orange. So you ask for him, and you get twice as much as you ask for. That's in the kingdom of heaven, you see. Yes, at Grinnell College, where I'd been, there's some dear old saints. They'd died in Grinnell this spring, and I went to McAllister College, and there were a bunch of old, seedy old professors, and the college president thought they weren't worth anything. He didn't respect them. There wasn't any harmony. I saw that some of those little professors had a lot to them. But they could accomplish a lot more if they were dead. Now, isn't that strange for me to say that? There's a book by a young woman named, what is this book? Ellen Riley is her girl that inspired her so. And she's written a book on, I remember Ellen Riley's name, but because I have to inspire her, and so I feel when I read and found Ellen Riley, it inspired. What? Yes, Eugenia Price. And she was an alcoholic, and she just drank her whiskey and smoked her cigarettes and everything. And then Ellen Riley came in. That sweet Ellen Riley. I just vanished out of my life. I prayed with her in New York, and then she said, I've got to go to some friends in Chicago. I've got to go to Chicago. So she was, and I'll read this book. Ellen Riley just quietly changed her life. And so she found the thing for her to do is just to let her old self be dead. And so on the jacket of the Soul of Sincere Desire, is there a copy of it over there? They're all gone. Well, you just take a look at that jacket, and you'll read this. This man finds prayer as natural as breathing, and all his prayers are answered. And my wife didn't like any overstatements, so I said to her, I'm going to write, tell her, Cedric, the editor of Atlantic, and tell him to take that off. And to my amazement, my modest wife said, no, I wouldn't bother, Glenn. For I've noticed ever since your mother died 3 years ago, all your prayers have been answered. Then I realized that she had some wishes for me when she was on this earth, but they were limited by her inhibitions of her body and her tensions of her mind. But the moment she stepped into heaven, all her wishes were multiplied in power by infinity. And that's why I'm here with power. Someone in heaven that just wishes were multiplied. Starr Daily is in the San Quentin Penitentiary. He's rotting away there. He's been there for the last 50 years. He'll be there until he's dead. That would have been true if it hadn't been that his father died. He said, I wish, how was it that my father died while everyone was calling me incorrigible, and I was incorrigible. All the judges and psychiatrists and officers incorrigible. Finally, the father would spend all his money trying to get the best lawyers for him. Came down with tears in his eyes, reached to the bars, said, son, know this, I'll always be praying for you, always be loving you. He went home and lay down and died. He hadn't been in heaven but a little while before his wishes multiplied in power by infinity. The skies opened, and Starr had been hanging in the cuffs for 15 days. They stretched him out in solitary confinement, and he saw a vision of Jesus. And he'd never seen such love in any eyes in all the universe as he saw in the eyes of Jesus. For 25 years, Starr Daily hadn't done anything but hate, even when he was with his father. While his father was begging him to reform, he was hating his father, hating everybody. He found that it was like an anesthetic. He could stand the pain, the punishment, and everything else if he hated hard enough. He hadn't let go of that hate for one moment, but that love just in those eyes, drew the hate out of him like poison drawn out of a wound. And he just wanted to lie there forever. He'd never experienced such bliss in all his life. But the vision faded away. And that through the bars, he heard the guard, who'd never had anything but a cuss word for him before. He heard the guard say, you must be hungry, fellow. I think I could swipe a sandwich for you if you'd like to have me. Try it. Well, that surprised Starr, but he's more surprised what he heard himself say. Don't do that. That would break the rules. And they'd punish you. I don't want you to be punished for me. Well, that surprised the guard, and he went for the doctor. And When they got Starr out of the hospital, the doctor insisted that no one administer the anesthetic but Starr Daily. Now, the mortality of prison operations are very high, but that doctor never lost a case. And Starr administers the anesthetic. One day he said to Starr, "What did you do? You seem to have some magic." He said, "I pray." Now, this was a profane doctor. He didn't even know how to pray. But he knew that there's a man that could help him. There came a very serious case. He said to Starr, "There's only one chance in 1,000, so we won't bother to take it." You say there's one chance in 1,000. Well, let's take it. So they took it. Starr didn't take his eyes from the hands of the doctor. He didn't see the hands of the doctor. He saw the hands of Jesus Christ. For 1 hour, he watched those hands work a marvelous, miraculous operation that was a perfect success. It does something to anyone to have someone see your hands in the hands of Jesus for an hour. When that operation was over, that doctor was a brand new man. He said to the nurses, "Don't let anyone disturb me. I've got to be alone." He went to his room, locked his door, and got down on his knees, and it took a reformed convict to change a profane doctor. Why couldn't my father have lived to see me change? I said to Starr, "If your father had lived, you wouldn't have made the change." Wasn't that too bad? Stephen was stoned to death. There was the man he'd been trying to convert, but he couldn't do it. The most wonderful mind in all Palestine, Saul of Tarsus. He said, "Hold this not against them." And there he died. He hadn't been in heaven very long before his wish, multiplied in power by infinity, all his wishing and arguing and everything else hadn't one saw, but the moment he released it in heaven, the skies opened and Jesus came right down there and changed Saul of Tarsus. And you want to know what started the Christian church, what built up the Christian church? It wasn't St. Peter, it wasn't St. John or St. James, it was St. Paul. And so I said, somebody's got to die up here before we ever have a college worthwhile. We've got $100,000 not in endowment but in debt. And then old Dr. Wallace, 95 years old, head of the Bible department, said, "I hope I gave $500 to do it. Never made any money. I hope it's the last money I'll ever have to give him." He said he's going to start a little magazine. It's still a little dinky magazine. Then old Dr. Wallace stepped into heaven, and his wishes were multiplied in power by infinity, and the little Reader's Digest shot up to 10,000, to 20, to 10 million, to 100 million, to 18 million. Then more than the Reader's Digest sold than any other magazine in the world, and what do it do with that $1 million that comes in? Well, he doesn't let his right hand know it, his left hand do it. So I'm not telling you anything. Dr. Wallace was interested in foreign missions. He was just sorry that none of his children went into foreign missions. While the Reader's Digest is doing foreign missionary work all over the world, as well as you'll find more Reader's Digest in Paris and any other magazine, the same in Madrid, and the same in Brazil, and the same in Japan, everywhere else. Now, isn't that strange to say that you'll find these things start when somebody dies? Well, I made a discovery, and that this, what's her name again? Eugenia Price made, a discovery that Paul made. He said, "I'm crucified in Christ. I live, and yet not I, but the Christ in me." And one reason he accomplished so much was because he erased himself out of the picture, and he died. Well, sir, the most valuable 7 days I spent was when I erased myself out of the picture. I went to Washington to give a series of addresses there before the CFO, and the thing happened to me like it happened here. Only I was for 7 days right there in bed. And I sent Rufus Mosley to do my talking for me. And those 7 days was a withdrawal were the most valuable days of my life. 3 of those days were with Dr. Elson in the parsonage of the National Presbyterian Church, where the 4 days of my son smiled. And while I was with Dr. Elson, he would go out every day to see Eisenhower and come in and ask me to pray that he join the church. He would begin his cabinet meetings with prayer and so on, and all of our prayers were answered. No one knows how valuable those days were, excepting God and Dr. Elson and myself. More valuable, the most valuable days for this nation that I've ever spent. And then when I was with my son, he discovered something, a book that I've been looking for, on the folklore. That is, runs me in to open up the field by which I can interpret God's voice in the folklore of all the nations, which I'm going to be doing this year. Talking with God, and not only talking with God directly, but asking him to interpret for the nations what he's been telling through fairy stories and Mother Goose rhymes and myths and legends to all the world. And so I'm going to tell you how you can live in the kingdom of heaven without having to die right away. Let's imagine we're all going to die, that we've already died, and I'll tell you what you're going to find in the kingdom of heaven. You're going to find 3 things. That you'll be with the persons you want to be with when you want to be with them. At that identical moment, they'll want to be with you. In the second place, you'll find ideas will come to you in perfect sequence and perfect order, just the ideas will bring blessing or inspiration or entertainment, happiness to those you're with. In the third place, you'll find the supply resides in the need, and if you have any real need, the Lord will furnish the supply. Now, I'm assuming, so I start each day, that I say that one little prayer, that they live in the kingdom of heaven, right? Send your kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. And so as I look around here, I find I'm with people that I want to be with, and I trust that you want to be with me. Of course, it's a little bit of a gamble. Sometimes you'll find one of those persons didn't want to be with you. But you can at least go your share by being willing to be with them. I learned that through a little drama my 3 children put on. The first dramatic play they ever presented. It was in the grandfather's attic of his old barn, now turned into a garage. When the gunny sack curtains parted, my little 4-year-old son announced, "This play will be called The Wise Judge and the 2 Stupids." And behind the table sat my 8-year-old daughter with her grandfather's spectacles on. And one side is my 6-year-old daughter, and over here is my 4-year-old son. And the daughter said, "Judge, this is my cookie." And the little boy said, "Judge, that is my cookie." And the wise judge said, "I'll soon settle that." "Now, Judge, he has the biggest hat." "Well, I'll soon settle that." "Now, she has the biggest hat." "Well, I'll soon settle that." "Now, he has the biggest hat." "Now, she has the biggest hat." And pretty soon there's a wise judge and 2 stupids. And I used to think that love had to be very carefully measured out on a 50-50 basis. If he slides down to 45 degrees, you must slide down to 35. Then you slide down to 25, then he to 15. Pretty soon you have a bankrupt friendship. But I found that it doesn't matter where it comes from, and that's why there's such power when Marcia and Roland and I went around the world. Roland would get up and he'd just swish around enough love to fill the whole room. Marcia would get up there and she'd swish around enough love to fill the room. And if there's anybody that still didn't love anybody else, I'd get up and do my best to swish around some. But I found it very easy to talk after all that love is there. So I have found you can create your kingdom of heaven by letting love always lead the way. Let love always lead the way, because that's what heaven is. It's love. What is God? That's definition. God is love. The definition of heaven is it's the place of abounding love. So you carry enough love with you, and you can create your heaven. And so every day I pray that thy kingdom might come on earth as in heaven, and I go out resolved to love everybody. And then I expect to be with the persons I want to be with, when I want to be with them. A man came into the train, a white-haired man, and he asked if he could sit down beside me. I said, that'd be all right. And then he told me that on every journey across the country, he felt himself led to tell his story to one person. As the years went by, I found myself afflicted with the same compulsion. Somewhere along the line, I'd find myself telling my story to just one person. Someday I should put into a book those persons that I talked to. It'd be more fascinating than any novel. I got on the train one day, and before I got on, there was a little group of folks clustered around a very aged man and his very frail, aged wife, and they were all weeping and sobbing and hugging and kissing, and then they let the old pair get on. I waited to let them get on, and they went into an apartment. And I saw there was trouble there. And I stepped in. I stepped in the doorway. I said, I beg your pardon, but if there's anything that, any trouble you have that prayer could help, I'd be very glad to help. And the old man turned around, that nervous tension of a frightened old man. Get out of here! So I hadn't been led. I apologized and gone. Well, it took several days to cross the continent in those days. I think the next morning I was shaving in the washroom. This old man was kind of washing his teeth and kind of wandering around kind of behind me several times. Thought sometimes I was going to leave, but finally he came and said, I beg your pardon, but are you the gentleman that spoke to us in the apartment? And I said, yes. I said, I wanted to apologize for hurting your feelings. Oh, he said, my wife has been just begging me to find that man. He said, because we really have a need, and I just felt that you're God-directed. Won't you please come in and talk with us? So he went in. And I found she was under the sentence of doom. She was sent out there so many weeks to live. They were afraid of death and afraid of everything, and they were... Well, I'm not afraid of death. They all are going to come to it, and it's one of the most wonderful things I could... those two old folks could determine before they stepped into heaven what wishes they wanted to have multiplied in power by infinity. They could bless their children in ways that unbelievable. Well, I went in then, prayed for her vitality, for all the Lord had, unless he had something better by this stepping into heaven, unless we prayed and she got peace and comfort. And then I went and they just felt that a benediction had come upon them. I was riding on the train, on the vessel from Boston to Portland. And I realized that I was ending my journey, and I hadn't told my story to anyone. I went down to the supper, 4 at every table, 2 men on the sides, perfectly silent, but the one opposite constantly talking. Have you ever been on the Maine coast before? No. Don't you think it's beautiful? I sure do. Where are you going? I'm going to Monhegan Island. What are you going to do when you're there? I'm going to be the guest of a writer. Did you ever write anything yourself? Yes. What did you write? With a soul sincere desire. You know what impressed me most in that book was the golf illustration, and he warbled on and on, told me more about the book than I knew myself. Later on, I was sitting on the deck watching the sun go down and the stars come out. That young man was wandering up and down the deck. Suddenly saw me. He said, I've been looking for you. Can't we talk a while? So we walked the deck. He said, I'm a chaplain at Amherst College, and I have to address the men once a week, and I don't know how to hold the attention of young men. Could you help me? I think I ought to. I've coached athletes for 20 years. I suppose you think your first duty is to make them good. I certainly, he said, I'm a minister. I said, well, that isn't your first duty. Well, what do you mean? Your first duty is to make yourself good. Oh, yes, he said, that's right. And your second duty is to make them happy. But you can't make them permanently happy unless you give them the basis of goodness that you based your happiness on. Well, he said, now that's exciting. Go on. And we talked for an hour, and then he stopped and he took me by the lapel of the coat and just looked me in the eyes, and he said, now at last I know why I'm on this vessel. I went down to the old South Station to buy a ticket on the train, and an unseen hand just pushed me down through the station to the wharf, and I've been wondering ever since why I'm on this boat. This has been the most important meeting in my life. He said, if you ever come near Amherst, let me know. I'll have you speak to those boys. I said, well, what's your name? He said, my name is Kinsaving. I don't have a card. I said, well, I can remember that. He said, how? I said, Kinsaving. Well, half the problems I have to solve are between kinsfolk. Kinsaving. 2 years later, I was on the Maine coast, gave an address to 50 ministries at the lunchtime, then I addressed them in the afternoon, and out of those addresses, they brought me there to sprang up the 2 Camps Farthest Out in New Hampshire. One of them has 400 every year, the other has 250. They just filled to the brim. And they usually come at the same time because there's such a demand. So that meetings were worthwhile. But at the lunchtime opposite me sat a tall man. He said, I'm the chaplain at Dartmouth College. Oh, then you know young Kinsaving, chaplain at Amherst, maybe. Oh, yes, he said, but he's not there anymore. He's at Trinity Church, Boston. An old lady said, that's Phillips Brooks' old church. Oh, I said, I consider Phillips Brooks the greatest minister that ever lived. So he's the assistant pastor in that famous church. Oh, not the assistant pastor, he's the head pastor. What? I said, how that church must degenerate. That's such a young man as that. No, said the old lady, it's frozen, she said that. And the chaplain said something that thrilled me. He said he's especially developed the power of drawing young people. He draws them from Harvard and from Wellesley. The girls in Wellesley call the bus that takes them into church on Sunday the Kinsaving Special. It's become the byword. The Atlantic Monthly said it's the byword of Boston. They never had anyone that could draw young people like that young Kinsaving. So that talk I'd had with him, you see, it borne wonderful fruit. Yes, said the old lady, he even draws them from the young people from the old South Church across the way. The chap said, don't talk so loud. The pastor of the old South Church was down the next table. Don't I know it? He's my son-in-law. I took a novel and took the story of my life to Harper's, asked them which one they'd like to publish. They said, oh, we'll take the story of your life. He said, that's more interesting than any novel you can ever write. Now, I'll tell you something. If you start every morning to pray that you'll be in the kingdom of heaven, your life is going to grow so much more interesting than any novel you could write. That is, to be of the people you want to be with when they want to be with you. That ideas will come to you in perfect sequence and order. Look at the 30 books that come through me after I got to be an old man, you might say. Well, at any rate, now, how do those things happen? Well, I don't have any time to write them, spend all this time traveling. All I'm saying is that the life is interesting. When I went to college, it was a co-educational college. I believe in co-educational colleges. I sat on the back row of the back there with the freshman boys, and over there the freshman girls. And I noticed one of the young girls going in and looked kind of charming, was up. And I remained in my seat until she went out, and I'd get there early and remain late. But I didn't get the courage to introduce myself. I joined a literary society, Boys Literary Society, And they decided to give a party to the girls' society, the sister society, they said. And so they had a unique way of pairing off. They put the names of the girls on the blackboard, and we drew numbers. And the one that drew number 1 could go up and scratch out his choice. Well, I maneuvered to get number 1. And I scratched out her name. I'd never introduced myself. She didn't know I existed. I found where she lived in the city. The next night, I walked around the block 5 times. And then I did a deed that deserves to rank with exploits of Horatio at the bridge and Charlotte Corday brigade. I marched upon the steps and I rang the bell. And she let me in person. And with a trembling hand holding on my straw hat, I went in and sat down, and she sat down in the parlor. And I got out what I'd come for, and she stared at me. She'd never seen me before. Well, I don't know what other boys she'd like to have gone with, but I certainly was not her choice. I could see that. But that's what Spanish boys have. The only way she could get the party was by accepting, so she finally did. Now, she wasn't especially anxious to be with me, but I was very anxious to be with her. That wasn't exactly heaven. That wasn't exactly hell. That was just purgatory. But 5 years later, when I graduated, spent a year in Harvard, cycled through Europe, I came back to that same campus. She'd graduated. We walked across a beautiful campus under a June moon, and I made a great discovery. That I wanted to be with her, and she wanted to be with me, and that was heaven. And we have remained in heaven ever since. After 30 happy years of married life, she one day asked Miles to read a passage from I Will Lift Up Mine Eyes. I'd almost feel tempted to read it to you here. It's over there. It was a it's a parable of 3 men who lost what they wanted. And the old man of patience spoke further. I am old, and my physical eyes see but a little way. You are young, and you see a great distance of the world. But because I am old, with the dimming of my outward sight has come the brightening of my inward vision. And I see that prayer cannot be answered except as you give yourself to its will and abide in joy by its fulfillment. Prayer is the gift of divine love. It is a sacrament between God and man. You do not take ruthlessly of your human love, but you give to it abundantly and abandon yourself to its will. Then can you neither take nor command divine love, but must abide in its will and give yourself wholly to its beneficent power. So sure has become my faith in this love of God that I abide in it without question. When my human prayer is not answered in the way I would expect to have it, I am much sorrowed, for I know I have submitted to a will greater than my own and capable of infinitely more goodness. When a man is in love, he does not then exist alone. How much more is it true that if a man dwells in divine love, he cannot exist alone, but is dependent and interdependent upon that love. I live upon it as I live upon the air with as much faith, for I know it will keep me with life, even after the air of our earth has become nothing. I ask of it, and I know that I ask not of my enemy, he was separate from me, but that I ask of my Father. And she said to Miles, that is the greatest thing that your father has ever written. And when I came home that noon, she was unconscious. And at 9 o'clock that night, I stepped out and looked up into the skies, and the most glorious aurora borealis ever graced the skies. We got to look at that, we come in and sit at her bedside, and then she stepped into heaven. And the next morning, this is October 3rd, all the leaves had changed into the most glorious colors that I'd ever known. Well, we're still in heaven because we've been living in heaven and the shock was not so great. And whenever I need special help, I can just say, now, Louise, you know more what I should be saying than I do myself, and you just open the doors of heaven, let the Lord speak through me. So I'm not afraid of death. But I don't believe in hurrying into it until our work is done. But when my father and mother reached the age up in the 60s, they said, we don't want to be a burden to others nor to ourselves. We don't want to live after we get to be a burden. We want to step into heaven quickly and easily. And our work is done. And we don't ever want, my mother said, I don't ever want to live with any of you 6 children. If your father goes, because he's 12 years younger than father, because I don't want to be dominating. Boston, there's only no roof is big enough to shelter 2 families. She's the kind that could have been in any home and never bothered. But when like that, don't let me be a burden on anybody, because if down deep in your heart you want to be a burden to them, you want to hang around and have them wait on you, the Lord will let you do it. You may not know that you're partly responsible for it. Not the dear old people that are invalids and all that. They love being invalids. They never really got treated as they think right until they got to be invalids. Don't try to be all that stuff. Well, anyway, I'm talking about a new type of, we got to learn a new kind of language. We're going to live now, many of us, until we get to be 120 years of age. They're increasing this age limit. And we've got to learn how, when we reach a certain stage, to let our children, when they get to be 30 and 40, they know enough how to bring up their family, and we're not supposed to come in and be telling them everything under the sun. I've had more women come to me. Lives are just frustrated, almost nervous breakdowns because of a mother. Just dominating, possessive. I wanted to come to Camps Farthest Out last year, but my mother said, here, I brought you up. Here for 50 years, I've loved you. And now you get more for a Camp Farthest Out than you do for me. You can't stay, want to run away and just spend a week away from me. And I think you ought to be right here with me for the next 20 years, day and night. Now, those things really, it's time for us to talk right out. And I think everybody, they ought to have required schools for kindergartners, children, and first graders. We have truant officers to see they go to school. I think we should have a required school for people when they get to be 60, have a 3-month course in how to grow old gracefully. And then we would have there's nothing more wonderful, powerful, valuable than the right years of folks, if they use them rightly. Well, for the right person, I think I told you when I was traveling from the world, I wanted to see Captain Fushida, who led the attack on Pearl Harbor. I told you that the other morning, didn't I? What? Oh. So now, if you're in heaven, you'll be with the person you want to be with. But I'd heard he'd become a Christian, and I didn't know where he was, and I didn't know any way to trace him down, so all I had to do was to ask the Lord. But I said, let thy kingdom come on earth as in heaven. So when I was in the big city of Osaka, in a Rotary Club of leading Japanese citizens, men, and Roland Brown and I were to address them. A handsome man came in and sat opposite me just before the meal began. And Marcia leaned over and said, a missionary just whispered to me that is Captain Fushida. And I said, Captain Fushida, how did you become a Christian? He said, when the war was over, I began to feel pangs of conscience that I had an unwitting cause of helping to start this great conflagration. It brought so much of evil upon Japan and upon America. So I began to ask the returning missionaries, returning Japanese from the foreign lands who'd been in prison camps, how they've been treated. They've been treated fine in America, treated fine in the Philippines. But especially those coming from the Philippines were high in praise of a young woman whose nickname was Rosebud. She did everything to make them happy, cheered them up in so many ways. They finally asked her why. She said, my parents were missionaries. They were captured by the Japanese, accused of being spies, and were to be verdict to death. When they found there's no escape, they asked to be left alone with their Bibles for half an hour before they were executed. He said, I knew that if they were alone with their Bibles, they were praying for the executioners. And then they were beheaded. And I resolved to give the rest of my life to saving the souls of the Japanese. And Captain Fushida said, I couldn't understand that. Anything happened to my parents like that would have made me blood enemies for life. So I couldn't rest till I got hold of that Bible, a Bible that they said that they'd been reading. And as I read that Bible, I became amazed to find it was a God of love. And I came to the book of Luke, and I read of Jesus hanging on the cross. And then when he said, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do, the tears rolled down my cheeks, and I said, I've got to be a Christian. I'm going to give my life from now on to following this man, Jesus Christ. So he became baptized, and he went forth. He's gone forth now to save all the Japanese for Christianity. And when we had the great Congress of Prayer in the National Presbyterian Church, it extended over the days of 6th, 7th, and 8th of December. The morning of the 6th, Catherine Marshall gave a great address. In the afternoon, Elton Trueblood spoke. In the evening, Frank Laubach spoke. And on the morning of the 7th, I was to speak, and this was the 15th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor. So when I finally opened up a letter that had just come from Captain Fushida, it stirred that whole audience. And this is the letter. Greetings in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. It is just 15 years ago today that I led the air raid on Pearl Harbor which precipitated the entry of the United States of America into World War II. But how different it is today that I'm sending a message to a Congress of Prayer to join in prayer for world peace. I am Mitsuo Fushida, a former captain in the Japanese Navy, but I've since been converted and now an earnest witness for Christ. It is so wonderful to just trust him and see the way in which he works. Since returning to Japan, I've been witnessing about God's work in America, and I'm also giving my testimony where I met the Lord. I have thrown all my physical and spiritual strength into this evangelical work throughout all Japan. And God is so good. For everywhere I've been received by crowded halls. God has turned the mission of Pearl Harbor around that I may serve him in a greater way than I had ever dreamed before. Surely I can say from my heart, as did the Apostle Paul in Philippians 1:12, that I would ye should understand, brethren, that the things that have happened to me have happened for the furtherance of the gospel. God is still leading me to stand a full-time worker as a layman evangelist. Thus my work in Japan continues, and here I'm earnestly praying to soon be able to organize this work as Captain Fushida Evangelical Association, just in faith and trusting him. I believe that the only answer to world peace is the heavenly peace of God, through acceptance of Christ and his forgiveness. And that is just what Japan needs today. I continually need the prayers of all the people of God that the doors of Japan may remain open, and that 1956 will witness the salvation of many who now sit in darkness. With love in our wonderful Lord, I send greetings. Yours by his grace, Mitsuo Fushida. And so living in the kingdom of heaven, meeting the people you want to meet, you never can know how those things will happen, bring to pass. And so a little girl came to a Camps Farthest Out, a niece of mine. I can say sadly that all my nieces and nephews are all stand behind their Uncle Glenn. All my sons and daughters and my grandchildren. Some people may think I'm a crackpot, but they don't. They know that it works right in their own homes. And this little niece, Helen, she just got this, heard me give this address, and she went out back to California, her little town, and every day she'd start living in the kingdom of heaven, knowing she's going to be with the person she wanted to be with. I usually tell her in perfect sequence. And I went out and spoke in a little church, and the young minister said, Exhibit A of the spiritual life is your niece. She just changed the young people's society. She changed the influence of the church. She's changed the high school. She's just changing her college. Well, after a few years, he couldn't stand it any longer, so he had to marry her. And then he wrote and said, Uncle Glenn, all the Presbyterian ministries in America every minister in America would love to get in the National Presbyterian Church in Washington. Will you write a recommendation for me? And Helen wrote, and Uncle Glenn, will you send a prayer about it? Well, Edward Elson said that my recommendation got in the job, but Helen said my prayer got in the job, and the result is Uncle Glenn gives the first Sunday night address in the National Presbyterian Church every year for the last 7 years. And through Edward Nelson, President Eisenhower is reading my books. And through you never can tell. When you're living in the kingdom of heaven, meeting the right person at the right time, you never can tell how far these may ramify. Might be a little high school student sitting in here. May go out, maybe the little boy might go out and become President of the United States someday. And so there it is. So all I do is just take the place of thy kingdom to come, and thy will be done on earth as in heaven, and then I don't go into the details. I couldn't think of the details. They're too interesting. I didn't know that Wallace, my father had to help him with the Wallace, never read a magazine that would spread out all over the world. I never knew that he could do that. I never knew that I'd be able to turn out books, and I was going to tell you how I turn them out. I go over to my Bible class for 30 years, and I just pray. I don't even have to prepare, because they come, as Jesus told his apostles when they sent them out, if they receive you as a righteous man, they'll receive a righteous man's reward. But if they receive you as a prophet, God will speak through you, and they'll get a prophet's reward. And they come expecting me to speak as a prophet. So all I have to do is to go in, and I can feel their hunger, the cavities, and I just open up and let it be pulled out like a bark ache. And then I go home and I say, I didn't know I could give as good a talk as that, and I make an outline. Then I come to the Camps Farthest Out, and I give that talk. And I keep giving it until they get bored, and I get bored, and then I put it into a book. And so I don't have to do writing books is the hardest job in the world. But you get before a group of folks that are just hungry, and they expect the prophet to speak to you, or the Lord to speak to you, and then he does speak to you, why, the work's all minimized. Now, the ideas, perfect sequence and order. I spent 12 summers writing an article for the Atlantic Monthly. Put all the knowledge of grammar and rhetoric I knew into it, sent it to Atlantic. And they sent it back, and I sent it to Harper's, and it's still back. And then a boy asked me how I prayed, because I've been learning how to pray. Now, you know how to pray, but you don't intend to write a book on it, because you're not a preacher. Well, I wasn't a preacher. I was a coach of athletes. Teacher of literature. I'd written a textbook on the short story art. Why should I write a book on prayer? But he wanted to know how I prayed. So I went home and sat down. I said, now, Lord, you take this and bring the ideas to in sequence and order. And he did. I was amazed when I looked at myself. I read it to a group of people the next morning, and they said, that's too good just for us. Why don't you send the Atlantic? Well, I knew the Atlantic didn't accept religious articles. But because they suggested it, I sent it. In perfect sequence and perfect order, the right time, you see, because, and the Atlantic Monthly said if you'd sent it a month earlier or a month later, we wouldn't have taken it. But it just came at a time when we needed this terrifically. Why? Well, Dr. Christopher Lake, the greatest theologian in the Harvard Theological Seminary, had written an article on prayer for the Atlantic, in which he said that prayer doesn't accomplish anything. No prayers were ever answered. They're just drafters that say that. The New Thought people, Christian Science, all of them are unorthodox, everything else. All the good people just go to church on Sunday and don't try to mix with prayer and any of that stuff all week long. Well, it's a famous man who wanted to put the article in, but they wanted to have another to take the other side. But they didn't dare ask a minister because they said we knew we'd get a little trite kind of an article. A sermon, a firstly, secondly, thirdly sort of a thing. And then yours came, just like wildflowers, pulled up with the roots, with the rich loam of the forest still clinging to them, and had your vital experience behind it, and I just fit it in, and so they put it in. And I think I told you about how I went over and bought a copy. I found it August 1924 on the sales places at the 27th of the preceding month. So on the 27th of July, I went over to the newsstand and bought a copy and took it home. My wife, and she said, why didn't you get a couple more so you can give to our mothers? I said, I'll go over tomorrow. Went over tomorrow, they were all gone. Went to the next newsstand, they were gone. Went to the next newsstand. Then the man stopped me. He said, you know, the Atlantic Monthly is a drug on the market. You have to send them back. Nobody buys Atlantic Monthly. The True Story magazine and the Moving Picture magazine and the Detective magazine, they go like hot cakes. But something's happened. We can't understand it. All over the city of Los Angeles, this Atlantic was all sold out in one day. And then the editor of Atlantic wrote me that your article sold the whole issue out, and you got expanded into a book. So I expanded it into a book. I think I told you the day about Larry Gould's letter, didn't I? I just came from another place where I'd been talking to, and I can't remember. Got a letter from Larry Gould, second in command of the bird expedition. I told you about that. Well, then I found that the articles God had written to me had saved the lives of 60 men. Why, that was wonderful. And I got a letter from, I got a barrel of letters. One of them was from Greenville, South Carolina. Our little baby's born blind. The doctor says he'll never see. And my husband and I are hugging our book to her, and we're praying. And won't you pray with us? And I wrote a letter. I think they got it framed in their home. But after some months, a letter came saying, now our little boy can see. The doctors can't understand it. But the big miracle that's happened is what's happened between my husband and me. Now it's bound us together as the bonds of love. Well, my books, they bring out a new edition every year. It's the 31st year, and it's the 31st edition. On the 25th year, they brought out a silver jacket edition. One lady brought me the silver jacket edition, wanted me to autograph it. Who was that lady? She here this morning that had that silver jacket. Well, at any rate, on that year, the 25th anniversary, I was speaking in Greenville, South Carolina, and a man and a woman came in, a farmer, I think he was, his wife, and with a young man of 25 sat down between them. Well, this baby that I'd prayed for was the same age as my book. So I figured that young man was the man I'd prayed for and born blind. So when I finished my address, they came up and introduced this young man. They said the doctor still can't understand it because his eyes were different. They said the doctor still can't understand it because his eyes were different. He couldn't see the pupils and things like that. They still don't understand it, but he has graduated from college. He can ride a bicycle through crowded traffic. And all these things came because I wrote a book. And I don't claim that I wrote that book. But I've been living in the kingdom of heaven, asking for the kingdom of heaven every day. And finally, somebody had asked me a question, and I let the ideas come as they would come in heaven, perfect sequence and order. And something happened, and that's all I can do, is just keep praying that prayer and going on in that way. But now, we reached the stage where I want to reach the president, whether it be Eisenhower or another man next year or whatever it is. I want to go in. I've been out before the public gaze, speaking so much, all this. I don't have time hardly to be alone. So when I came down here, the Lord picked me up with a nape of the neck and put me up in my room. Hardly had time to have a conference that I wanted to have with you. Some of you may need some conference. You can see me after this before lunchtime. But I do know this. Because God has not worked such wonders, if I'm willing to make a sacrifice and reach myself a little more completely, He can either use me or some other instrument of the Camps Farthest Out to just bring this into the nation and into the governments of all the nations. And it's a time when you don't need to pussyfoot anymore, but just to go right up and tell just the mere actual facts. So now let me tell you one illustration, though, that shows this. I tune in the kingdom of heaven in the morning. Then I do what I feel led to do. And so one morning I set aside one year I wanted to write another book. And the only time I had for writing is Thursday mornings. I didn't have any classes until 11:30. By cutting chapel that morning, I could have a body of time. But one morning I woke and every bone in my body just itched to go to chapel. So I went, and as I walked in, the dean was announcing that a car with 4 of our students in it had gone over a cliff and turned turtle 4 times. And little Margaret would not live through the day. As I went out, I asked one of the professors if that Margaret's little freshman girl I knew, and he said yes. And that year the students had asked if they could come down to my house and let me talk to them once a week on living in the kingdom. I said, if you'll come at 7:15 on Tuesday nights and leave promptly at 7:45, so it won't interfere with your activities, your studies, or mine, be all right. Well, they came. They kept increasing in number till about 60 or 70. The football team came. It's just a mediocre team, but the first year they ever won the championship. They said they were always in the right place to see forward passes. They didn't understand it. My wife said, there's a little freshman girl, Margaret, has a wistful look. I wish you'd have a talk with her. I think she needs you. One day I went in to see one of the faculty members in his classroom. They were assembling, but he wasn't there. And I ran over, I saw Margaret standing by his desk, and I went up and talked with her. I found she was the only daughter of a widowed mother. I said, I'd like to have a visit with you. Oh, she said, I want to. I'm coming soon. And now she wasn't coming. Well, as I hurried out of the chapel, I saw a boy rushing to catch the streetcar. I said, wait a minute, George, are you going down to the hospital? He said, yes. Is it on the streetcar line? No, it's way off the line. You have to long walk at the other end. I said, I have a little car. I've had the battery put in storage for the winter. Just had put back yesterday. You wait, I'll take you down. And we got there, we found the president and his wife and 8 members of the faculty all standing in the hallway waiting for the little girl to die. George took me into the room where the little girl was lying and introduced me to the mother who'd come down during the night. They took the mother out and they closed the door. 2 doctors came in. They began to examine her hands and her head, hands and her feet, irritating the palms and soles of the feet. I said, do you think she'll live? They said, no. And she picked up, she had no blood pressure, no heartbeat, no breathing. They're just saying now she'll be paralyzed for life if she does live. Beside the bed there was a table, and on the table was a vase full of flowers. And I thought if that vase would fall crashing to the floor, it'd break into 1,000 fragments, and they took a moving picture of it. All they need to do would be to turn it in the opposite way, and they'd see all the fragments thrown up into a hole. Isn't that exactly what heaven is? It's just usually everything in reverse. Instead of leading with the left in hate, you lead with the right in love. Just the reverse. The opposite of war is peace. The opposite of hate is love. Because if the Lord turned the moving picture of this world, we'd have a marvelous place of peace. Well, what do I have faith in? The power of gravity and death, or Jesus and life. Well, I put my faith in Jesus. But I got what I wanted, and I went out. I'd stayed longer than I thought. The Lord had left. I got in my car, reached the college, threw my hat down in my office, and then I hurried down to my classroom, the last class of the year. Very anxious to meet with them. As I passed the clock on the hall, I saw that I was 15 minutes late, and no class had ever been known to wait for a professor after the first 10 minutes. My heart sank. But there's something in that room I needed, so I hurried into the room. And it wasn't until I got in the very center of the room became aware of the fact that the silence of that room was not a silence of emptiness, but a silence of prayer. Every girl and every boy was in his place. One of the boys closed the door softly, and one of the girls whispered, they told us where you went. I said, you may want a report, and I'll give it to you. I think that little girl's going to be with us next year. But I'm not in the mood to talk about the little secondary laws of grammar and rhetoric today. I've got to tell you honestly that if you ever want to become a successful writer, you've got to obey the great primary laws of opening one ear to the voice of God, putting your other ear down to the heartbeats of humanity, like Lincoln, who didn't even qualify to go to a college or a high school. When he went to the Gettysburg, he put his ear down to the heartbeats of those people, and he opened his other ear to the voice of God. Some of them told me they learned more in that half hour than they had in half a year. A year went by, and a little girl in a white dress walked into my office, and I said, what brought you here? She said, today is the anniversary of the day they thought I was dead. I came to thank you. I said, don't thank me. I didn't do anything. Down in the corner of 7th and Wabashaw in St. Paul, there stands the policeman in the crowded traffic hours, and he stops the traffic east and west, lets the traffic north and south come through. Then he lets the other traffic stop, and he brings that through. Well, that man hasn't had a 6th grade education. Supposing I push him aside and show how a man with a college degree can handle this traffic, why, I'd have no power, would I? They'd just laugh at me. What is the secret of his success, of his power? Simply this, that he wears over his heart an insignia that shows that he's a representative of a government greater than himself. And if you and I can go out from this retreat wearing deep in our heart a symbol that we're just a channel of a power greater than ourselves, we may be able to stop the wrong ideas and let the right ideas come through. Then, with enough of us, we can stop war. No limits. Let us bow in prayer. Our Father, we want to thank you for that little Lord's Prayer. And we want to pray as ever before that thy kingdom may come in our lives and express in our homes and our work and wherever we are. It may be with those we want to be with. The ideas will be there to bring the blessings upon others. And that if we have a real need to supply will come rolling in. Just like when there's that little well in the seashore sand, the ocean can fill it. So, Father, take the threads of our lives and weave them into the tapestry of thine eternal purposes. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.